Okay, welcome to the Life in the UK, Chapter 3, Allowance and Illustrious History. The first sections of Chapter 3 goes through the histories of Britain from its beginnings that can be traced back to the Stone Age, covering all the different civilizations that lived in Britain in the old times, including the Romans, the Anglo Saxons, Viking, and the Norman. Section 2 examines the histories of Britain during medieval times, including a review of the Black Death disease, which affected a large part of the British populations and which resulted in the appearance of new social classes. The Middle Ages. Medieval times also brought important legal and political changes, such as developments of parliaments in England and Scotland. This period is also known for the developments of the English language. The last part of this session focused on the British Civil War that gave rise to the House of Tudors. Section 3. Section 3 is an overview of the Tudor and the Stuart monarchs of Britain, starting with the reign of Henry VIII at the beginnings of the 16th centuries, followed by the reign of his daughter Elizabeth I, James I of England, and Charles I to the creations of the English Republic by Oliver Cromwell, the restorations of the monarchy, and up to the times of the glorious revolutions of the late 17th century. Furthermore, this session provides information about the Elizabeth periods in England, which is remarkable periods in Britain's stories and which includes achievements such as the defeats of the Spanish Armada, the beginnings of the colonizations of New England, and that is also known by the richness of the British poetry and drama to include playwrights such as William Shakespeare. Section 4 explores the creations of the constitutional monarchy, the creations of the kingdoms of Great Britain, through the acts of the unions by which the Scotland adhered to England and Wales, the rebellions of the clans in Scotland, the periods of the entertainment during the 18th century, the industrial revolutions driven by the developments of machinery and the use of steam power, the booming of the slave trade and its subsequent abolitions through the Emancipation Act, the unions of Northern Ireland with England, Wales, and Scotland to form the United Kingdoms of Great Britain and Ireland, the independence of a number of American colonies, the wars with the French and the Crimean War, the growth of the British Empire, and the developments of the democracies. So Section 5 covers the period from the First World War to the Second World War and what the meant for Britain. Section 6 ran through the political, social, and economic changes that took place in the Britain after the Second World War and up to recent times. It also introduced some of the most important British personalities and inventions of the 20th centuries. Wow, so totally like 6 sessions. Wow, quite a lot. Okay, we're gonna start now. So chapter 3 is quite a lot then. Early Britain. The first people to live in Britain were hunter-gatherer in what we call the Stone Age. For much of the Stone Age, Britain was connected to the continent by a land bridge. People came and went, following the hearts of deers and horses which they hunted. Britain only became permanently separated from the continent by the channel about 10,000 years ago. Wow. The first farmers arrived in Britain 6,000 years ago. The ancestors of these first farmers probably came from Southeast Europe. These people built houses, tombs, and monuments on the land. One of these monuments, Stonehenge, still stands in what is now the English countries of Wiltshire. Stonehenge was probably a special gathering place for seasonal ceremonies. Other Stone Age sites have also survived. Sakara Bra on Orkney off the north coast of Scotland is the best preserved prehistoric village in Northern Europe and has helped archaeologists to understand more about how people lived near the end of the Stone Age. Around 4,000 years ago, people learned to make bronze. We call this period the Bronze Age. People lived in round houses and buried their dead in thrones called round barrows. The people of the Bronze Age were accomplished metal workers who make many beautiful objects in bronze and gold, including tools, ornaments, and weapons. The Bronze Age was followed by the Iron Age. The bronze is first, and it was followed by the Iron Age. When people learned how to make weapons and tools out of iron, people still live in round houses, grouped together into larger settlements, and sometimes defended sizes called hill forts. A very impressive hill fort can be seen today at Marian Castle in the English country of Dorset. Most people were farmers, craft workers, or warriors. The language they spoke was part of the Catholic language family. Familiar languages were spoken across Europe in the Iron Age, and related languages are still spoken today in some parts of Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. The peoples of the Iron Age had a sophisticated culture and economy. They made the first coin to be minted in Britain. Some inscribed with the names of Iron Age kings. This marks the beginnings of British history. That is the beginnings of the British history. And then Roman. So first is the Bronze Age, followed by the Iron Age. The Roman. Julius Caesar led a Roman invasion of Britain in 55 BC. This was unsuccessful, and for nearly 100 years, Britain remained separated from the Roman Empire. In AD 43, the Emperor Claudius led the Roman armies in a new invasion. This time, there was resistance from some of the British tribes, but the Romans were successful in occupying almost all the Britain. Wow, AD 43, long ago. One of the tribal leaders who fought against the Roman was Boudicca. Boudicca is the queen of the Iceni in what is now Eastern England. She's a queen of the Eastern England. It's called Iceni. She's still remembered today, and there is a statue of her on Westminster Bridge in London. near the Houses of Parliaments. Area of what is now Scotland were never conquered by the Romans, and the Emperor Hadrian built a wall in the north of England to keep out the Picts. Picts is the ancestor of the Scottish people. Included in the wall were a number of forts. So, included in the wall were a number of forts. Inside the wall have some forts inside. Wow. Parts of Hadrian wall, including the forts of the Hausstadt and Vindolanda, can still be seen. It is a popular area for walkers and is a UNESCO. UNESCO means United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organizations World Heritage Sites. The Roman remains in Britain for 400 years. They built roads and public buildings, created a structure of law and introduced new plants and animals. It was during the 3rd and 4th centuries AD that the first Christian communities began to appear in Britain. This is the first. And second is the Anglo Saxons. The Roman army left Britain in AD 410 to defend other parts of the Roman Empire and never returned. The Roman is gone in AD 410. Britain was again invaded by tribes from northern Europe. The Jutes and the Angles and the Saxons, or the Jutes. The Jutes, Angles, and the Saxons. The Jutes, Angles, and the Saxons. The languages they spoke are the basis of modern-day English. Battles were fought against these invaders, but by about AD 600, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were established in Britain. These kingdoms were mainly in what is now England. The burial what?
Burial.
The burial place of one of the kings was at Saughton Hoo in modern Suffolk. The king was buried with treasures and armor, all placed in a ship which was then covered by a mound of art. Parts of the west of Britain, including much of what is now Wales and Scotland, remain free of Anglo-Saxon rule. Wales and Scotland. Wales is this side, Scotland is the northern, remained free of Anglo-Saxon rule. The Anglo-Saxons were not Christian when they first came to Britain, but during this period, missionaries came to Britain to preach about Christianity. Missionaries from Ireland spread the religions in the north. The most famous of these were Saint Patrick, who would become the patron saint of Ireland, and Saint Columba, who founded a monastery on the islands of Iona, off the coast of what is now Scotland. Saint Augustine led missionaries from Rome, who spread Christianity. Christianity in the Scots. St. Augustine became the first
Archbishop.
the first archbishops of Canterbury. The Vice King. The Vice King came from Denmark and Norway. They first visited Britain in AD 789 to raid coastal towns and take away goods and slaves. Then they began to stay and form their own communities in the east of England and Scotland. The Anglo Saxon kingdoms in England united under the King Alfred the Great, who defeated the Vikings. Many of the Viking invaders stay in Britain, especially in the east and north of England, is an area known as the Danes' Law. Many place names there, such as Grimsby and
Scunthorpe.
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 Wow. Scunthorpe come from the Viking languages. The Viking settlers mixed with local communities and some converted to Christianity. Christianity. Anglo-Saxon kings continued to rule what is now England, except for a short period when there were Danish kings. The first of these was Kent, also named Canute. In the north, the threats of attack by Viking had encouraged the people to unite under one king. Wow.
Kenneth. MacAlpin.
Kenneth MacAlpin. The term Scotland began to use to describe that country. The Normal Conquest. In 1066, the invasions led by William, the Duke of Normandy, in what is now northern France, defeated Harold, the Saxon kings of England, at the Battle of Hastings. Harold was killed in the battle. William became king of England and is known as William the Conqueror. The battle is commemorated in the great piece of embroidery known as the Bayeux Tapestry, which can still be seen in France today. Wow. Embroidery. The Norman Conquest was the first successful foreign invasions of England and led to many changes in government and social structures in England. Norman France, the language of the new ruling class, influenced the developments of the English language as we know it today. Initially, the Normans also conquered Wales, but the Wales gradually won territory back. The Scots and the Normans fought on the border between England and Scotland. The Normans took over some lands on the border but did not invade Scotland. William sent people all over England to drop a list of all the towns and villages, the people who lived there, who owned the land, and what animals they owned were also listed. This was called the Domesday Book. It still exists today and gives a picture of society in England just after the Norman Conquest. So check that you understand the history of the UK before the Romans, the impacts of the Romans on British society, the different groups that's invaded after the Roman, the importance of the Norman invasions on 1066. So next is the Middle Ages. War at home and abroad. Okay. The Middle Ages. War at home and abroad. The period after the Norman conquest was up until about 1485 is called the Middle Ages or the medieval period. It was a time of almost constant war. The English kings fought with the Welsh, Scottish, and Irish noblemen for control of their lands. In Wales, the English were able to establish their rules. In 1284, King Edward I of England introduced the Statutes of
Statute. Rutland.
Statutes of Rutland, which annexed Wales of the... Is it annexed?
Annexed.
Yeah. Which annexed Wales to the crowns of England. Huge castles, including Conwy and trouble me. Caernarvon were built to maintain this power. By the middle of the 15th century, the last Welsh rebellions had been defeated. English laws and the English language were introduced. In Scotland, the English kings were less successful. In 1314, the Scottish, led by Robert the Bruce, defeated the English at the battles of Bannockburn, and Scotland remains unconquered by the British. At the beginnings of the Middle Ages, Ireland was an independent country. The English first went to Ireland as troops to help the Irish king and remained to build their own settlements. By 1200, the English ruled an areas of Ireland known as the Pales around Dublin. Some of the important lords in other parts of the Ireland accepted the authorities of the English king. During the Middle Ages, the English kings also fought a number of wars abroad. Many knights took part in the Crusades, in which European Christians fought for control of the Holy Land. English kings also fought a long war with France, called the 100-Year, even though it actually lasted 116 years. One of the most famous battles of the 100 Years' War was the battles of
Agincourt.
The Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where King Henry V vastly outnumbered English army defeated the French. The English left France in the 1450s. The Black Death. The Normans used a system of land ownership known as feudalism. The English gave land to his lords in return for help in war. The king gave land to his lords in return for help in war. Landowners had to send certain numbers of men to serve in the army. Some
Peasants.
peasants had their own land, but most were serfs.
Serfs.
Most were serfs. They had a small area of their lord's land where they could grow food. In return, they had to work for their lords and could not move away. The same system developed in southern Scotland. In the north of Scotland and Ireland, land was owned by members of the clans. Clans mean prominent families. In 1348, a disease, probably a form of plague, came to Britain. This was known as the Black Death. 1/3 of the populations of England died, and a similar proportions in Scotland and Wales. This was one of the worst disasters ever to strike Britain. Following the Black Death, the smaller populations meant there was less need to grow cereal crops. There were labor shortages and peasants began to demand higher wages. New social classes appeared, including owners of large areas of land, later called the gentry. And people left the countryside to live in the town. In the towns, growing wealth led to the development of a strong middle class. And in Ireland, the Blood Death killed many of the Pales, and for a time the area controlled by the English became smaller. So, legal and political changes. In the Middle Ages, Parliament began to develop into the institutions it is today. Its origins can be traced to the King's Councils of Advisors, which included important noblemen and the leaders of the church. There were few formal limits to the king's power until 1215. In that year, King John was forced by his noblemen to agree to a number of demands. The result was a charter of rights called the Magna Carta, which means the Great Charter. The Magna Carta established the idea that even the king was subject to the law. It protected the rights of the nobility and restricted the king's power to collect taxes or to make and change laws. In future, the king would need to involve his noblemen in decisions. In England, parliaments were called for the king to consult his nobles, particularly when the king needed to raise money. The number standing parliament increases and two separate parts, known as houses, were established. This nobility, great landowners and bishops, sat in the House of Lords. Knights, who were usually smaller landowners, and wealthy people from towns and cities were elected to sit in the House of Commons. Only a small part of the population was able to join in electing the members of the Commons. A similar parliament developed in Scotland. It has three houses called estates: the Lords, the Commons, and the clergy. This was also a time of development in the legal systems. The principle that judges are independent of the development began to be established. The principle that judges are independent of the development began to be established. In England, judges developed common law by a process of precedence, that is, following previous decisions and traditions. In Scotland, the legal system developed slightly differently and laws were codified, that is, written down. A distinct identity. The Middle Ages saw the developments of the national culture and identity. After the Normal Conquest, the king and his noblemen had spoken normal French, and the
Peasants.
The peasant had continued to speak Anglo Saxon. Gradually, these two languages combined to become one English language. Some words in modern English, for example, park and beauty, are based on Norman French words. Other, for example, apple, cow, and summer are based on Anglo-Saxon words. In modern English, there are often two words with very similar meanings, one from French and one from Anglo-Saxons. The man is French and axe is Anglo-Saxons are examples. By the 1400 in England, official documents were being written in English, and English had become the preferred language of the royal court and parliaments. In the years leading up to 1400, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a series of poems in English about the groups of people going to Canterbury on a
Pilgrimage.
What?
Pilgrimage.
Pilgrimage. The people decided to tell each other stories on the journey, and the poems describe the travelers and some of the stories they told. This collection of poems is called the Canterbury Tales. This was one of the first books to be printed by William Caxton. Printed by William Caxton, the first person in English to print books using a printing press. Many of the stories are still popular. Some have been made into plays and television programs. In Scotland, many people continue to speak Gaelic, and the Scots language also developed. A number of poets began to write in the Scots language. One example is John Barber, who wrote the rules about the Battle of Bagnobban. The Middle Ages also saw a change in the types of building in Britain. Castles were built in many places in Britain and Ireland, partly for defense. Today, many are in ruins, although some, such as Windsor and Edinburgh Castle, are still in use. Great cathedral, for example, Lincoln Cathedral, were also built, and many of these are still used for worship. Several of the cathedrals had windows of stained glass, telling stories about the Bible and Christian saints. The glass in York Minster is a famous example. During these periods, England was an important trading nation. English wool became a very important export. People came to England from abroad to trade and also to work. Many had special skills such as weaver from France, engineers from Germany, glass manufacturers from Italy, and canal builders from Holland. Weaver from France, engineer from Germany, glass manufacturer from Italy, and canal builders from Holland. Canal builders from Holland. Wow. York Minster stained glass. The Wars of the Roses. In 1455, a civil war began to decide who should be kings of England. Who should be? It was fought between the supporters of two families, the House of Lancaster and the House of York. This war was called the Wars of the Roses because the symbol of Lancaster was a red rose and the symbol of York was a white rose. The wars ended with the battles of Bosworth Fields in 1485. King Richard III of the House of York was killed in the battle, and Henry Tudor, the leaders of the House of Lancaster, became King Henry VI. Henry then married King Richard's niece, Elizabeth of York, and united the two. So who win? The wars ended with the battles of Bosworth Field in 1485. King Richard III of the House of York was killed in the battle, and Henry Tudor, the leader of the House of Lancaster, became King Henry VI. Henry then married King Richard's niece, Elizabeth of York, and united the two families. So York is loser and Lancaster is a winner. Okay. Henry was the first king of the House of Tudor. So the symbols of the House of Tudor was the red rose, who is a winner, with the white rose inside it as a sign that, so the bigger one, the red is outside with the winner, and the loser, the white one, is inside, as a sign that the House of York and Lancaster were now allied. So check that you understand the wars that took place in the Middle Ages, how Parliament began to develop, the way that land ownership worked, the effects of the Black Death, the developments of English language and culture, the Wars of the Roses, the founding of the House of Tudors. Okay. And the Tudors and the Studs.
Stuarts.
Stuarts. Stuarts.
Stuarts.
Stuarts. Okay. Religious conflict. After his victory in the Wars of the Roses, Henry VI wanted to make sure that England remained peaceful and that his position as king was secure. He deliberately, let me see.
Deliberately.
Yes. He deliberately strengthened the central administrations of England and reduced the powers of the nobles. He was thrifty or what?
Thrifty.
Thrifty. He was thrifty and built up the monarchy financial reserves. When he died, his son Henry VIII. Oh, so not Henry VI, Henry VII. So the first is a Henry VII. So this is now Henry VIII. Henry VIII continued the policies of centralizing power. Oh, so Henry VIII was most famous for breaking away from the Church of Rome and marrying 6 times. Wow, Henry VIII. Henry VIII was King of England from 21st of April 1509 until his death on 28th of January 1547. Wow. The 6 wives of Henry VIII. Oh, it's a lot. Wow. Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was a Spanish princess. She and Henry had a number of children, but only one, Mary, survived. When Catherine was too old to give him another child, Henry decided to divorce her, hoping that another wife would give him a son to be his heir. Anne Boleyn.
Boleyn.
Okay. Henry Boleyn. What? Henry Boleyn. Henry Boleyn was English. She and Henry had one daughter, Elizabeth. Annie was unpopular in the country and was accused of taking lovers. She was executed at the Tower of London. Wow. And Jane, who is it?
Seymour.
Oh.
Seymour.
Wow. Jane Seymour. Henry married Jane after Anne's executions. Wow. Henry married Jane after Anne's executions. She gave Henry the son he wanted, Edward, but she died shortly after his birth. Oh, she died shortly after his birth. Anne of Cleves. Anne of Cleves. Anne was the German princess. Henry married her for political reasons, but divorced her soon after. Catherine Howard. Catherine was a cousin of Anne Boleyn. She was also accused of taking lovers and executed. Wow. So only with the James Seymour got Edward. And Catherine Parr. Catherine was a widow who married Henry later in his life. She survived him and married again but died soon after. Oh. Only so many wives. To divorce the first wife, Henry needed the approvals of the Pope. When the Pope refused, Henry established the Church of England. In this new church, the king, not the Pope, would have the power to appoint bishops and order. What is bishops? Senior member of the Christian, usually in charge of the blah blah blah. Okay. So would have the powers to appoint bishops and order how people should worship. At the same time, the Reformation was happening across Europe. This was a movement against the authorities of the Pope and the ideas and practice of the Roman Catholic Church. The Protestants formed their own churches. Their own churches. They read the Bible in their own languages instead of Latin. They did not pray to saints or shrines. And they believed that a person's own relationship with God was more important than submitting to the authority of the church. Protestants' idea gradually gained strength in England, Wales, and Scotland during the 16th century. In Ireland, however, attempts by the English to impose what? Protestantism or what?
Protestantism.
Huh? What?
Protestantism.
Protestantism. Protestantism.
Protestantism.
Protestantism, alongside efforts to introduce the English systems of laws about the inheritance of land, lead to rebellion from the Irish. Hey, again, what?
Chieftains.
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 Chieftains, and much brutal fighting followed. During the reigns of Henry VIII, Wales became formally united with England by the Act for the Governments of Wales. This is the Wales country. That is called, how to pronounce?
Welsh.
Welsh. Welsh is a language.
Welsh.
The Welsh. Son represented, not language, it's maybe the people. The people of Wales called Welsh. The Welsh. Sent representatives to the House of Commons, and the Welsh legal system was reformed. Henry VIII was succeeded by his son Edward VI. Wow, what is succeeded? Is a kill or what? Wow. What? It's not really kill, but kinds of take over or something. Henry VIII was succeeded by his son Edward VI, who was strongly Protestant. During his reign, the Book of Common Prayer was written to be used in the Church of England. A version of this book is still used in some churches today. Edward died at the age of 15 after ruling for just over 6 years, and his half-sister Mary became queen. Mary was a devout Catholic and persecuted Protestants. For this reason, she became known as Bloody Mary. Wow. Mary also died after a short reign, and the next monarch was her half-sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. So Anne Boleyn is, who is it? Anne Boleyn is the English. She and Henry had only one daughter, Elizabeth. Anne was unpopular in the country and was accused of taking liver. She was executed at the Tower of England. This is called Anne Boleyn. So Elizabeth is Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII daughter. Okay, now Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I was the younger daughter of Henry VIII. So Elizabeth I was the younger daughter of Henry VIII. Queen Elizabeth I was a Protestant. She re-established the Church of England as the official Church of England. Everyone had to attend their local church, and there were laws about the types of religious services and the prayers which could be said. But Elizabeth did not ask about people's real beliefs. She succeeded in finding a balance between the views of the Catholics and the more extreme Protestants. In this way, she avoided any serious religious conflicts within England. Elizabeth became one of the most popular monarchs in English history, particularly after 1588, when the English defeated the Spanish Armada. Armada is a large fleet of ships, which had been sent by Spain to conquer England and restore Catholicism. Wow. The Reformation saw Scotland send Mary, Queen of Scots. Scotland had also been strongly influenced by Protestant idea. In 1560, the predominantly Protestant Scottish parliaments abolished the authorities of the Pope in Scotland and Roman Catholic religious service became illegal. The Protestant Church of Scotland, with an elected leadership, was established, but unlike in England, this was not a state church. The Queen of Scotland, Mary Stuart, often now called Mary, Queen of Scots, was a Catholic. She was only a week old after her father died and she became queen. Much of her childhood was spent in France. When she returned to Scotland, she was the center of the power struggle between different groups. When her husband was murdered, Mary was suspected of involvement and flee to England. She gave her throne to her Protestant son, James VI of Scotland. Mary was Elizabeth I's cousin and hoped that Elizabeth might help her, but Elizabeth suspected Mary of wanting to take over the English throne and kept her prisoner for 20 years. Oh, very sorry. Mary was eventually executed, accused of plotting against Elizabeth I. Oh, very sorry. Explorations, poetry, and drama. The Elizabeth period in England was a time of growing patriotism, a feeling of pride in being English. English explorers sought new trade routes and tried to expand British trade into the Spanish colonies in the Americas. Sir Francis Drake. What? Drake. Sir Francis Drake, one of the commanders in the defeats of the Spanish Armada, was one of the founders of England's naval traditions. His ship, the Golden Hinge, was one of the first to sail right around, circumnavigate the world. In Elizabeth's time, English settlers first began to colonize the eastern coast of America. These colonizations, particularly by people who disagree with the religious view of the next two kings, greatly increased in the next century. The Elizabethan periods, is it Elizabethan?
Elizabethan.
Yeah, Elizabethan.
Elizabethan.
Wow. The Elizabethan period is also remembered for the richness of its poetry and drama, especially the plays and poems of William Shakespeare. So William Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. William Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. Shakespeare was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, England. Stratford-upon-Avon. He was a playwright and is a playwright?
Playwright.
Yeah. He was a playwright and actor and wrote many poems and plays. His most famous plays include A Midsummer Night's Dream, Hamlet, Macbeth, and Romeo and Juliet. He also dramatized significant events from the past, but he did not focus solely on kings and queens. He was one of the first to portray ordinary Englishmen and women. Shakespeare had a great influence on the English language and invented many words that are still common today. Lines from his plays and poems which are often still quoted include Once more enter the breach, Henry V. To be or not to be, Hamlet. A rose by any other name, Romeo and Juliet. At the wall, all the world's a stage, as you like it. The darling birds of May. Sonnet 18. Shall I compare these to a summer day? Wow. This is a picture of Shakespeare. Shakespeare is widely regarded as the greatest writer in the English language. Many people regard Shakespeare as the greatest playwright of all time. His plays and poems are still performed and studied in Britain and other countries today. The Globe Theatres in London is a modern copy of the theatres in which his plays were first performed. James 6 and 1. What? Elizabeth I never married and so had no children of her own to inherit her throne. When she died in 1603, her heir was her cousin James VI of Scotland. He became King James I of England, Wales, and Ireland, but Scotland remained a separate country. The King James Bible. One achievement of King James' reign was a new translation of Bible into English. This translation is known as the King James Versions or the Authorized Versions. It was not the first English Bible, but is a version which continue to be used in many Protestant churches today. Ireland. During this period, Ireland was an almost completely Catholic country. Henry VIII and Henry VIII had extended English control outside the Pales and had established English authority over the whole country. Henry VIII took the title Kings of Ireland. English laws were introduced and local leaders were expected to follow the constructions of the Lord. What? Lieutenants. The Lord Lieutenants in Dublin. During the reign of Elizabeth I and James I, many people in Ireland opposed rule by the Protestant governments in England. There were a number of rebellions. The English government encouraged Scottish and English Protestants to settle in Ulster or what? Ulster. To settle in Ulster, the Norman province of Ireland, taking over the land from Catholic landholder. These settlements were known as plantations. Many of the new settlers came from southwest Scotland, and other land was given to companies based in London. James later organized similar plantation in several other parts of Ireland. This has serious long-term consequence for the histories of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Wow. The race of Parliament. Elizabeth I was very skilled at managing Parliament. During her reign, is it reign?
Reign.
Yeah, reign. During her reign, she was successful in balancing her wishes and views against those of the House of Lords and those of the House of Commons, which was increasingly Protestant in its view. James I and his son Charles I were less skilled politically. Both believed in the divine rights of king, the idea that the king was directly appointed by God to rule. They thought that the king should be able to act without having to seek approval from parliaments. When Charles I inherited the thrones of England, Wales, Ireland, and Scotland, he tried to rule in line with this principle. When he could not get Parliament to agree with his religious and foreign policies, he tried to rule without the parliaments at all. For 11 years, he found ways in which to raise money without Parliament's approval, but eventually trouble in Scotland meant that he had to recall Parliament. The beginnings of the English Civil War. Charles I is a Charles, right? Let me see.
Charles.
Yeah, Charles I wanted the worships of the Church of England to include more ceremony and introduce the revised prayer book. He tried to impose his prayer book on the
Presbyterian.
Presbyterian Church in Scotland, and this led to serious unrest. A Scottish army was formed, and Charles could not find the money he needed for his own army without the help of parliaments. In 1640, they recalled parliaments to ask it for funds. Many in parliaments were Puritans, a group of Protestants who advocated strict and simple religious
Doctrine.
Wow. Doctrine and worship. He did not agree with the king's religious view and disliked his reforms of the Church of England. Parliament refused to give the king the money he asked for, even after the Scottish army invaded England. Another rebellion began in Ireland because of the Roman Catholics in Ireland were afraid of the growing powers of the Puritans. Parliament took this opportunity to demand control of the English army, a change that would have transferred substantial power from the king to parliaments. In response, Charles I entered the House of Commons and tried to arrest 5 preliminary leaders, but they had been warned and were not there. No monarch had set foot in the common since that time. Civil war between the king and parliament could not now be avoided and began in 1642. The country split into those who supported the kings, the Cavaliers, and those who supported Parliament, the Roundheads. Wow. Oliver Cromwell and the English Republic. The king's army was defeated at the battles of Marston Moor and Naseby. By 1646, it was clear that Parliament had won the war. Charles was held prisoner by the parliamentary army. He was still unwilling to reach any agreement with the parliaments, and in 1649 he was executed. England declared itself a republic called the Commonwealth. It is no longer had a monarch. For the time, it was not totally clear how the country would be governed. For now, the army was in control. One of its generals, Oliver Cromwell, was sent to Ireland, where the revolt, which had begun in 1641, still continued, and where there was still a royalist army. Cromwell was successful in establishing the authorities of the English Parliament, but did this with such violence that even today Cromwell remains a controversial figure in Ireland. The Scots had not agreed to the executions of Charles I and declared his son Charles II to be king. He was crowned King of Scotland and led a Scottish army into England. Cromwell defeated his army in the battles of Dunbar and Worcester. Charles II escaped from Worcester, famously hiding in an oak tree on one occasion, and eventually flee to Europe. Parliament now controls Scotland as well as England and Wales. After his campaign in Ireland, victory over Charles II was at Worcester. Cromwell was recognized as the leader of the new republic. He was given the title of Lord Protector and ruled until his death in 1658. When Cromwell died, his son Richard became Lord Protector in his place, but was not able to control the army or the government. Although Britain had been a republic for 11 years without Oliver Cromwell, there was no clear leader or systems of government. Many people in the country wanted stability. People began to talk about the need for a king. The Restorations. In May 1660, Parliament invited Charles II to come back from exile, right?
Exile.
Yeah. Exiles in the Netherlands. He was crowned King Charles II of England, Wales, and Scotland and Ireland. Charles II made it clear that he had no wish to go on his travels again. He understood that he could not always do as he wished, but would sometimes need to reach agreement with the parliaments. Generally, Parliament supported his policies. The Church of England again became the established official church. Both Roman Catholics and Puritan were kept out of power. During Charles II reigns,
Reign.
What is reaching? During Charles II regime, the 1665, there was a major outbreak of plague in London. Thousands of people died, especially in poorer areas. The following year, a great fire destroyed much of the city, including many churches and St. Paul Cathedral. London was rebuilt with a new St. Paul's, which was designed by a famous architect, St. Christopher I. Samuel Pepys wrote about these events in a diary, which was later published and is still read today. The happy what? No.
Habeas.
Oh, the habeas corpus act became law in 1679. This was a very important piece of legislation which remains relevant today. Habeas corpus is Latin for you must present the person in court. The act granted that no one could be held prisoners unlawfully. Every prisoner has a right to a court hearing. Charles II was interested in science. During his regime, the Royal Society was formed to promote natural knowledge. This is the oldest surviving scientific society in the world. Among its early members were Sir Edmund
Halley.
Among its early members were Sir Edmund Halley, who successfully predicted the returns of the comet now called Halley Comet, and Sir Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, 1643 to 1727, born in Lincolnshire. Yes. Born in Lincolnshire, Eastern England, Isaac Newton first became interested in science when he studied at Cambridge University. He became an important figure in the field. His most famous published work was Philosophia. Hey, is it Philosophia?
Philosophia.
Yeah, Philosophia.
Naturalis.
Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica. Mathematical principles of natural philosophy. Oi. Wow. Which show how gravity applied to the whole universe. Newton also discovered that white light is made out of the colors of the rainbow. Many of his discoveries are still important for modern science. A Catholic king. Charles II had no legitimate children. He died in 1685, and his brother James, who was a Roman Catholic, became King James II in England, Wales and Ireland, and King James VI of Scotland. James favored Roman Catholics and allowed them to be army officers, which an act of parliament had forbidden. He did not seek to reach agreements with parliaments and arrested some of the bishops. What is a bishops? Oh, senior member. Some of the bishops of the Church of England. People in England worried that James wanted to make England a Catholic country once more. However, his heir were his two daughters, who were both firmly Protestants. and people thought that this meant there would soon be a Protestant monarch again. Then James I had a son. Suddenly, it seems likely that the next monarch would not be a Protestant after all. Catholic king. A glorious revolution. James' two elder daughter, Mary, was married to her cousin William of Orange, the Protestants' ruler of the Netherlands. In 1688, important Protestants in England asked William to invade England and proclaim himself king. When William reached England, there was no resistance. James fled to France, and William took over the throne, becoming William III in England, Wales and Ireland, and William II of Scotland. William ruled jointly with Mary. This event was later called the Glorious Revolutions because there was no fighting in England and because it granted the powers of parliaments, ending the threats of monarch ruling on his or her own as he or she wished. James too wanted to regain the thrones and invaded Ireland with the help of the French army. William defeated James II at the battles of the Boyne at the battles of the Boyne in Ireland in 1690, an event which is still celebrated by some of Northern Ireland today. William reconquered Ireland and James fled back to France. Many restrictions were placed on the Roman Catholic Church in Ireland, and Irish Catholics were unable to take part in the governments. There was also support for James in Scotland. An attempt at an armed rebellion in support of James was quickly defeated at what? Killiecrankie. Defeated at Killiecrankie. All Scottish clans. What is a clan? A close-knit group or interfere family. All Scottish clans were required formally to accept William as king by taking an oath. Promise. Please. Statement. The MacDonald of the what? Glencoe or what? Glencoe. The MacDonalds of Glencoe were late in taking an oath. The memory of this massacre or what? Massacre. Oh, the memory of this massacre meant some Scots distrusted the new government. Some continue to believe that James was the rightful king, particularly in Scotland. Some joined him in exile in France. Others were secret supporters. James' supporters became known as Jacobites. Wow. Check that you understand. How and why religion changed during this period. The importance of poetry and drama in the Elizabethan periods. About the involvement of Britain in Ireland. The developments of Parliament and the only period in history when England was a republic. Why there was a restoration of the monarchy. How the glorious revolutions happened. A global power. Constitutional monarchy. The Bills of Rights. At the coronations of William and Mary, a declaration of right was read. This confirmed that the king would no longer be able to raise tax and administer justice without agreement from parliaments. The balance of power between monarch and parliament had now permanently changed. The Bill of Rights 1689 confirmed the rights of parliaments and the limits of the king's power. Parliaments took control of who could be monarch and declared that the king or queen must be a Protestant. A new parliament had to be elected at least every 3 years. Later, this became 7 years and now it is 5 years. Every year, the monarch had to ask Parliament to renew funding for the army and the navy. The charges meant that to be able to govern effectively, the monarch needed to have advisors or minister who would be able to ensure a majority of votes in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. There were two main groups in Parliament known as the Whigs and Tories. Wow. The modern Conservative Party is still sometimes referred to as the Tories. This was the beginnings of party politics. This was also an important time for the developments of a free press. Newspapers and other publications which are not controlled by the government. From 1695, newspapers were allowed to operate without a government license. Increasing numbers of newspapers began to be published. The law passed after the Glorious Revolutions are the beginning of what is called constitutional monarchy. The monarch remained very important but was no longer able to insist on particular policies or actions if Parliament did not agree. After William III, the ministers, is it minister? Yeah, I think.
Ministers.
The ministers gradually became more important than the monarch, but this was not a democracy in the modern sense. The number of people who had the right to vote for member of parliament was still very small. Only men who owned properties of a certain value were able to vote. No woman at all had the vote. Some constituencies were controlled by a single wealthy family. They were called the pocket borough. Other constituencies had hardly any voters and were called rotten borough. A growing populations. This was a time when many people left Britain and Ireland to settle in new colonies in America and elsewhere, but others came to live in Britain. A first Jew to come to Britain since the Middle Age settled in London in 1656. Between 1680 and 1720, many refugees called, what?
Huguenots.
Huguenots came from France. They were Protestants and have been persecuted for their religions. Many were educated and skilled and worked as scientists in banking or in weaving or other crafts. The Acts or Treaties of Union in Scotland. The Act or Treaties of Union in Scotland. William's and Mary Saxon, Queen Anne had no surviving children. This created uncertainty over the successions in England, Wales, and Ireland and in Scotland. The Act of Union, known as the Treaties of Union in Scotland, was therefore agreed in 1707, creating the kingdoms of Great Britain. Although Scotland was no longer an independent country, it kept its own legal and education system and Presbyterian Presbyterian Church. Okay. The Prime Minister. When Queen Anne died in 1714, Parliament chose a German, George I, to be the next king because he was Anne's nearest Protestant relative. An attempt by Scottish Jacobites to put James II's sons on the throne instead was quickly defeated. George I did not speak very good English, and this increased his need to rely on his minister. The most important minister in Parliament became known as the Prime Minister. The first man to be called this was Sir Robert Walpole, who was Prime Minister from 1721 to 1742. 21 years become a Prime Minister, Sir Robert. The rebellions of the clans. In 1745, there was another attempt to put a Stuart king back on the throne in place of George I's sons, George II. Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charles, the grandson of James II, landed in Scotland. He was supported by clansmen from the Scottish Highlands and raised an army. Charles initially had some successes. Is this successes? Successes, but was defeated by George II's army at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Charles escaped back to Europe. The clans lost a lot of their powers and influence after Culloden. Chieftains became landlords if they had the favors of the English kings, and the clansmen became tenants who had to pay for the land they used. A process began which became known as the Highland Clearance. Many Scottish landlords destroyed individual small farms known as crofts to make space for large flocks of sheep and cattle. Evictions became. What is evictions? A spelling. Evictions. Eviction became very common in the early 19th century. Many Scottish people left for North America at this time. They kill each other. Robert Burns, 1759 to 1796. Robert Burns, known in Scotland as the bird, isn't it? The bird. Robert Burns was a Scottish poet. He wrote in the Scots language, English with some Scottish words and Standard English. He also revised a lot of the traditional folk songs by changing or adding lyrics. Burns' best known work is probably the song Auld Shan. Auld Shan. Auld Lang Syne, which is sang by people in the UK and other countries when they are celebrating the New Year, or Hogmanay as it is called in Scotland. New Year is called Hogmanay. Hogmanay. Isn't it Hogmanay or Hogmanay?
Hogmanay.
Hogmanay. Hogmanay as it is called in Scotland. The Enlightenment. During the 18th century, new ideas about politics, philosophy, and science were developed. This is often called the Enlightenment. Many of the great thinkers of the Enlightenment were Scottish. Adam Smith developed an idea about economics, which are still referred to today. David Hume's ideas about human nature continue to influence philosophers. Scientists' discoveries such as James Watt's work on steam power helped the progress of the industrial revolutions. One of the most important principles of the Enlightenment was that everyone should have the right to their own political and religious beliefs, and that the state should not try to dictate to them. The state should not try to dictate to them. This continued to be an important principle in the UK today. The Industrial Revolutions. Before the 18th century, agriculture was the biggest source of employment in Britain. There were many cottage industries where people worked from home to produce goods such as clothes and lace. The Industrial Revolution was the rapid development of industry in Britain in the 18th and 19th centuries. Britain was the first country to industrialize on the large scale. It happened because of the developments of machinery and the use of steam power. Agriculture and the manufacturing of goods became merchandise. This made things more efficient and increased productions. Coal and other raw materials were needed to power the new factories. Many people moved from the countryside and started working in the mining and manufacturing industries. The developments of the
Bessemer.
The developments of the Bessemer process for the mass productions of steel lead to the developments of the shipbuilding industry and the railway. Manufacturing jobs became the main source of employment in Britain. The manufacturing jobs became the main source of employment in Britain. Richest
Arkwright.
Richest Arkwright, 1732 to 1792. Born in 1732, Richest Arkwright originally trained and worked as a barber. He was able to dye hair and make wings. When wings became less popular, he started to work in textile. What is wing? When wings became less popular, he started to work in textiles. He improved the original carding machine. Carding is the process of preparing fibers for spinning into yarn and fabrics. He also developed horse-driven spinning mills that use only one machine. Miles. Spinning miles. Workshop. This increased the efficiency of productions. Later, he used the steam magic to power machinery. Arkwright is particularly remembered for the efficient and profitable way that he ran his factories. Better transport links were needed to transport raw materials and manufacture goods. Canals were built to link the factories to towns and cities and to the ports, particularly in the new industrial areas in the middle and north of England. Working conditions during the Industrial Revolutions were very poor. There were no laws to protect employees who were often forced to work long hours in dangerous situations. Children also worked and were treated in the same way as adults. Sometimes they were treated even more harshly. Wow. This was also a time of increased colonizations overseas. Captain James Cook mapped the coast of Australia, and a few colonies were established there. Britain gained control over Canada and the East India Company, originally set up to trade, gained control of large parts of India. Colonies began to be established in southern Africa. Britain traded all over the world and began to import more goods. Sugar and tobacco came from Northern America and the West India. Indies. Textile, tea and spices came from India, the area that is today called Indonesia. Wow. Trading and settlements overseas sometimes brought Britain into conflict with other countries, particularly France, which was expanding and trading in a similar way in many of the same area of the world. VIII Muhammad, 1759 to 1851. Muhammad was born in 1759 and grew up in the Bengal regions of India. He served in the Bengal army and came to Britain in 1782. He then moved to Ireland and Allops. What? Ran away. Oh, to marry.
Eloped.
Eloped with an Irish girl called Jane Daly in 1786, returning to England at the turn of the century. In 1810, he opened the Hindustan Coffee House in George Street, London. It was the first curry house to open in Britain. Muhammad and his wives also introduced shampooing, the Indian art of head massage, to Britain. Oh, curry house and shampooing. The slave trade. These commercial expansions and prosperity was sustained in part by the booming slave trade. While slavery was illegal within Britain itself, by the 18th century it was a fully established overseas industry dominated by Britain and the American colonies. Slaves came primarily from West Africa, traveling on British ships in horrible conditions. They were taken to America and Caribbean, where they were made to work on tobacco and sugar plantations. The living and working conditions for slaves were very bad. Many slaves tried to escape and others revolted against their owners in protest at their terrible state treatments. Wow. There were, however, people in Britain who opposed the slave trade. The first former anti-slavery groups were set up by the Quaker.
Quakers.
Quaker. In the late how to pronounce?
1700s.
1700s. In the late 1700s, and they petitioned parliaments to ban the practice. William Wilberforce, the what?
Evangelical.
An evangelical Christians and a member of parliaments also played an important part in changing the law, along with other abolitionists, isn't it? Abolitionists, people who supported the abolitions of slavery. He succeeded in turning public opinion against the slave trade. In 1807, it became illegal to trade slaves in British ships or from British ports. And in 1833, the Emancipation Act abolished slavery throughout the British Empire. The Royal Navy stopped slave ships from other countries, freed the slaves, and punished the slave traders. After 1833, 2 million Indian and Chinese workers were employed to replace the free slaves. They worked on sugar plantations in the Caribbean, in mines in South Africa, on railways in East Africa, and in the army in Kenya. The American Wars of Independence. By the 1760s, there were substantial British colonies in North America. The colonies were wealthy and largely in control of their own affairs. Many of the colonists' families had originally gone to North America in order to have religious freedom. They were well educated and interested in ideas of liberty. The British government wanted to tax the colonies. The colonists saw this as an attack on their freedom and said there should be no taxations without representations in the British parliaments. Parliament tried to compromise by repealing some of the taxes, but relationship between the British governments and the colonies continued to worsen. Fighting broke out between the colonists and the British forces. In 1776, 13 American colonies declared their independence, stating that people had a right to establish their own governments. The colonists eventually defeated the British Army, and British recognized the colonies' independence in 1783. War with France. During the 18th century, British fought a number of wars with France. In 1789, there was a revolution in France, and the new French government soon declared war on Britain. Napoleon, who became Emperor of France, continued the war. British Navy fought against combined French and Spanish fleet, winning the battles of Trafalgar Trafalgar, isn't it? Let me check.
Trafalgar.
Trafalgar in 1805. Admiral Nelson was in charge of the British fleet at Trafalgar, and was killed in the battle. Nelson columns in Trafalgar Square, London, is a monument to him. His ship, HMS Victory, can be visited in Portsmouth. The British Army also fought against the French. In 1850, the French wars ended with the defeat of the Emperor Napoleon by the Dukes of Wellington at the battles of Waterloo. Wellington was known as the Iron Jew and later became prime ministers. The Battle of Trafalgar, 21st of October 1805, was a naval engagement fought by the British Royal Navy against the combined fleets of the French Navy and Spanish Navy. The Union fled. Although Ireland had the same monarch as England and Wales since Henry VIII, it had remained a separate country. In 1801, Ireland became unified with England, Scotland, and Wales after the Acts of Union of 1800. Isn't it?
800.
Huh? No. What?
800.
No, 1800. This created the United Kingdoms of Great Britain and Ireland. One symbol of this union between England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland was a new version of the official flag, the Union flag. This is still used today as the official flag of the UK. The Union flag consists of 3 crosses. The cross of St. George's, patron saint of England, is a red cross on a white ground. Hey, what? Patron saints, the cross of St. George's. Let me see the cross of St. George's. This cross of St. George's is a red cross on white ground is England. The cross of St. Andrew. The cross of St. Andrew is a diagonal white cross on a blue background. This one. Diagonal. Okay. This one is a St. Andrew is this one. St. George's is this one. And it's a St. Andrew is a Scotland. St. Andrew is Scotland. St. Patrick. St. George's is England. St. Andrew is Scotland. St. Patrick is Ireland. Oh shit. This is this is diagonal, another diagonal. This is a St. Patrick. St. Patrick, patron saint of Ireland. Diagonal red cross on a white ground. This is a Ireland. Okay, Ireland. The Union flag is also known as the Union Jack. Hey, Union Jack, Union flag. So this is a Union. This is this one, St. George's. This diagonal is St. Andrew. St. George's, St. Andrew, and this. That is a Union. Union Jack. Understand now. This is called St. George's, isn't it? St. George's is this one. St. George's from England. St. Andrew from Scotland. St. Patrick from Ireland. St. Patrick from Ireland. And they combine, become this one and this one combine is this. And this become a Union Jack. So England, St. George's, St. Andrew is Scotland, and Ireland. How about Wales? The Union flag is also known as a Union Jack. The crosses of the 3 countries combine from the Union flag. St. George's is England, St. Andrew is Scotland, St. Patrick is Ireland. Ireland is a diagonal red. Okay. There's also an official Welsh flag. Hey, we show the Welsh dragon. So many. So many. The official wish flag. Oh, dragon. This one. Okay. This one. There is also an official wish flag, which shown a wish dragon. The wish dragon does not appear on the Union flag because when the first Union flags were created in 1606 from the flags of Scotland and England, and the principality, principality, Principalities of Wales was already united with England. Oh, so Wales is already with England. So St. George's is England, St. Andrew is Scotland, St. Patrick is Ireland. So this is a St. George's flag, and this is a St. Andrew from Scotland, isn't it? Scotland, yeah. St. Patrick from Ireland, and the Union Jack is this, and the Wales does not combine because it's already there. Okay, already united with this. The Victorian age. The Victorian age in 1873. Wow. Queen Victoria became Queen of the UK at the age of 18. She reigned until 1901, almost 64 years. Wow. Victoria became queen at 18. Her regime is known as the Victorian age. Wow, 1873, a long ago. It was a time when Britain increased in power and influence abroad. Within the UK, the middle classes became increasingly significant, and numbers of reformer led moves to improve conditions of life for the poor. The British Empire. During the Victorian period, the British Empire grew to cover all of India, Australia, and a large parts of Africa. It became the largest empire of the world has ever seen, with an estimated population of more than 400 million people. Wow, it's a lot. Many people were encouraged to leave the UK to settle overseas. Between 1853 and 1930, as many as 13 million British citizens left the country. People continued to come to Britain from other parts of the world. For example, between 1817 and 1914, around 120,000 Russian and Polish Jews came to Britain to escape persecutions. Many settled in England, East End, and in Manchester and Leeds. People from the empire, including India and Africa, also came to Britain to live, work, and study. Trade and industry. Britain continued to be a great trading nation. The government began to promote policies of free trade, abolishing a number of taxes on imported goods. One example of this was the repealing of the Corn Laws in 1846. These had prevented the import of cheap grain. The reforms helped the developments of the British industry because raw materials could now be imported cheaply. Working conditions in factories gradually became better. In 1847, the number of hours that women and children could work was limited by law to 10 hours per day. Better housing began to be built for workers. Transport links also improved. enabling goods and people to move more easily around the country. Just before Victoria came to the throne, the father and son George and Robert Stephensons pioneered the railway engines, and a major expansions of the railways took place in the Victorian periods. Railways were built throughout the empire. There were also great advances in other areas, such as the buildings of bridges by engineers such as Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, 1806 to 1859. Brunel was originally from Portsmouth, England. He was an engineer who built tunnels, bridges, railway lines, and ships. He was responsible for constructing the Great Western Railway, which was the first major railway built in Britain. It runs from Paddington stations in London to the southwest of England, the West Midlands and Wales. Many of the Brunel's bridges are still in use today. The Clifton Suspension Bridge was designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel and is spinning the Avon George. British industry led the war in the 19th century. The UK produced more than half all the world's iron, coals, and cotton cloth. The UK also became a center for financial services, including insurance and banking. In 1851, the Great Exhibitions opened in Hyde Park in the Crystal Palace, a huge building made of steel and glass. Exhibits ranged from huge machines to handmade goods. Countries from all over the world showed their goods, but most of the objects were made in Britain. The Crimean War. The Crimean War. From 1853 to 1856, Britain fought with Turkey and France against Russia in the Crimean War. It was the first war to be extensively covered by the media through news, stories, and photographs. The conditions were very poor and many soldiers died from illnesses they caught in the hospitals rather than from war wounds. Queen Victoria introduced the Victoria Cross Medal during this war. It honors acts of valor by soldiers. What is valor? Florence Nightingale, 1820 to 1910. Florence Nightingale was born in Italy to English parents. At the age of 31, she trained as a nurse in Germany. In 1854, she went to Turkey and worked in military hospitals, treating soldiers who were fighting in the Crimean War. She and her fellow nurses improved the condition in the hospital and reduced the mortality rate. In 1860, she established the Nightingale Training School for Nurses at St. Thomas Hospital in London. The school was the first of its kind and still exists today. As do many of the practices that Florence used, she is often regarded as the founders of the modern nursing. Ireland in the 19th century. Conditions in Ireland were not as good as in the rest of the UK. 2/3 of the population still depends on farming to make their living, often on very small plots of land. In the middle of the centuries of the potato crop failed, and Ireland suffered a famine. What is it? Famine. What is famine? Famine. What? famine. What is famine? True reserve, famine through the region. And Ireland suffer famines. 1 million people die from disease and starvations. Another million and a half left Ireland. Some immigrate to the United States and others came to England. By 1861, there were large populations of Irish people in cities such as Liverpool, London, Manchester, and Glasgow. The Irish nationalist movement had grown strongly through the 19th century. Some, such as the Fenians. Irish Republic Brotherhood, nationalist people. Some, such as the Fenians, favored complete independence. Others, such as Charles Stewart, such as Charles Stuart's panel, advocated Home Rule, in which Ireland would remain in the UK but have its own parliament. The right to vote. As the middle classes in the wealthy industry towns and cities grew in influence, they began to demand more political power. The Reform Acts of 1832 had greatly increased the number of people with the right to vote. The Act also abolished the old pocket and rotten boroughs, and more parliamentary seats were given to the towns and cities. There was a permanent shift of political powers from the countryside to the town by voting was still based on ownerships of the property. This meant that members of the working class were still unable to vote. A movement began to demand the vote for the working classes and other people without property. Campaigners called the Chartists. Called the Chartists. Campaigner is called the Chartists. Charter. The campaigners called the Chartists presented petitions to parliaments. At first, they seemed to be unsuccessful. But in the 1867, there was another Reform Act. This created many more urban seats in parliaments and reduced the amounts of property that people needed to have before they could vote. However, the majority of men still did not have the right to vote and no woman could vote. Politicians realized that the increased numbers of voters meant that they needed to persuade people to vote for them if they were to be sure of being elected to parliaments. The political parties began to create organizations to reach out to ordinary voter. Universal suffrage. The right to vote. Universal suffrage, the rights of every adult, male or female, to vote, followed in the next century. In common with the rest of Europe, women in 19th century Britain had fewer rights than men. Until 1870, when a woman got married, her earning, property and money automatically belonged to her husband. Acts of Parliament in 1817 and 1882 gave wives the right to keep their own earnings and property. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, an increasing numbers of women campaigned and demonstrated for greater rights and in particular the right to vote. They formed the women's suffrage movements and became known as the Oh, wait. What?
Suffragettes.
Suffragists. Oh, what is suffragists? The woman seeking the right to vote through organized protest. Okay. And became known as the suffragists. Hey, what? Trouble me again. Emmeline
Pankhurst.
Emmeline Pankhurst, 1858 to 1928. Emmeline Pankhurst was born in Manchester in 1858. She set up the Women's Franchise League in 1889, which fought to get the votes in local elections for married women. In 1903, she helped found the Women's Social and Political Union, WSPU. This was the first group whose members were called what is it? Suffragettes. Whose members were called suffragists. The group used civil disobedience as part of their protest to gain the vote for women. They chained themselves to railing, smashed window, and committed arson. What is arson? Fire to the property. Oh gosh. Criminal act or deliberately setting fire to the property. Arson. Many of the women, including Emmeline's, went on hunger strike. In 1918, women over the age of 30 were given voting right and the right to stand for parliaments. Partly in recognition of the contributions women made to the war effort during the First World War. Shortly before Emmeline's death in 1928, women were given the right to vote at the age of 21, the same as men. The futures of the empire. Although the British Empire continued to grow until the 1920s, there was already discussions in the late 19th century about its future directions. Supporters of expansions believed that the empire benefited Britain through increased trade and commerce. Others thought the empire had become overexpanded and that the frequent conflicts in many parts of the empire, such as the Indians northwest frontier to southern Africa, were a drain on resources. Yet the great majorities of British people believed in the empire as a force for good in the war. The Boer War of 1899 to 1902 made the discussions about the futures of the empire more urgent. The British went to war in South Africa with settler from the Netherlands called the Boers. The Boers fought how to pronounce? Fiercely. What is fiercely? Fiercely. Violent, aggressive manner. Wow. The Boer, isn't it? Fiercely.
Boers.
Yeah. The Boers fought fiercely, aggressively fought. And the war went on for over 3 years. Many died in the fightings and many more from disease. There was some public sympathy for the war and people began to question whether the empire could continue. As different parts of the empire developed, they won greater freedom and autonomy from Britain. Eventually, by the second half of the 20th century, there was, for the most part, an orderly transitions from empire to Commonwealth, with countries being granted their independence. Empire to become a Commonwealth. Understand now? Hey, come again. Trouble me. How to pronounce?
Rudyard.
Rudyard
Kipling.
Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling, 1865 to 1936. Rudyard Kipling was born in India in 1865 and later lived in India, the UK and the USA. Or he lived in India, the UK and the USA. He wrote books and poems set in both India and the UK. His poems and novels reflected the India that the British Empire was a force for good. Kipling was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1907. His book include the Just So stories and the Jungle Book, which continue to be popular today. His poem, If, has often been voted among the UK's favorite poems. His poem, If, or the name of his poem maybe If, has often been voted among the UK's favorite poem. It begins with these words. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you. But make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tried by waiting. Or being lied about, don't deal in lie. Or being hated, don't give way or hating. And yet, don't look too good nor talk too wise. If. Wretches. What? Forget again. What? Rudyard Kipling. Wow, that is what they call poems, isn't it? So, check that you understand the change in the balance of power between parliaments and the monarchy. When and why Scotland joined England and Wales to become Great Britain. The reasons for a rebellion in Scotland led by Bonnie Prince Charles, isn't it? The ideas of the Enlightenment, the importance of the industrial revolutions and developments of industry, the slave trade and when it was abolished, the growth of the British Empire, how democracy developed during this period. The 20th century. Okay, we start the 20th century. The First World War. The 20th century start with the First World War. The early 20th century was the times of optimism in Britain. The early 20th century was a times of optimism in Britain. The nations, with its expansive empire, well-admired navy, thriving industry, and strong political situations, was what is now known as a global superpower. It was also a time of social progress. Financial help for the unemployed, old age pensions and free school meals were just a few of the important measures introduced. Various laws were passed to improve safety in the workplace. Town planning rules were tightened to prevent the further developments of slum. And what is a slum? Let me see. Look at slum. Very poor people. Urban street. It's a kind of urban street or districts by very poor people. Further developments of slums and better supports were given to mothers and their children after divorce or separations. Local government became more democratic and a salary for members of parliaments was introduced for the first time. MP got the money now. In the past, MP may work like a volunteer or what. Members of parliaments was introduced for the first time, making it easier for more people to take part in public life. Understand now? So people can be joined in the public life because they can get the salary too. Understand? These eras of optimism and progress was cut short when war broke out between several European nations. In 28 June 1914, Archduke. Archduke, let me see.
Archduke.
Yeah, Archduke. France. Ferdinand. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Australia. Isn't it? Is it Australia?
Austria.
Yes. Australia was assassinated. This set off a chain of events leading to the First World War. First World War is 1914 to 1980. Oh, 4 years. Wow, it took 4 years. But why the assassinations provided the trigger for war, other factors such as growing sense of nationalism in many European states, increasing materialism. No, not the material. Militarism. Yeah, militarism. Increasing militarism. Imperialism. Isn't it? Imperialism. What is imperialism? Oh, policy of extending the country powers and influence through the colonization's use of military is called imperialism. Oh. Increasing militarism, imperialism, and the divisions of the major European powers into two camps all set the conditions for war. Oh, because of militarism and imperialism made the power into that's supposed that set the conditions for war. Understand now? The conflicts was centered in Europe, but it was a global war involving nations from around the world. Britain was part of the Allied powers, which included, among others, France, Russia, Japan, Belgium, Serbia, and later Greece, Italy, Romania, and the United States. Wow. The whole of the British Empire was involved in the conflict. For example, more than 1 million Indians fought on behalf of Britain in lots of different countries. Around 40,000 were killed. Wow. Men from the West Indies. Maybe India they call Indies. Let me see. What is Indies? Another forms of East in India. Oh, kinds of India the same. Indies, isn't it? Indies, yes. Men from the West Indies, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada also fought with the British. The Allies fought against a central power, mainly Germany. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman. Yeah. The Ottoman Empire and later Bulgaria. Millions of people were killed or wounded, with more than 2 million British casualties, isn't it?
Casualties.
Yeah, casualties. What are casualties? A person killed or injured in the war or in the accidents. Wow. With more than 2 million British casualties. On battle, the British attack of the Somme. Hey, what is it? Somme. What is Somme? Major battles of First World War between its kinds of name. Oh, Somme. Oh. On battle, the British attack of the Somme in July 1916 resulted in about 60,000 British casualties on the first day alone. Wow. The First World War ended at 11 a.m. on 11 November 1918 with victory for British and its allies. Oh, that's why in what is it, November. Guy Fawkes Night is the 5th of November, isn't it? But First World War is 11 a.m. on 11 November 1918 with the victory for British and its ally. All understand, 1918. The partitions of Ireland. In 1930, the British government promised Home Rule for Ireland. The proposal was to have a self-governing Ireland with its own parliament but still part of the UK. A Home Rule bill was introduced in parliaments. It was opposed by the Protestants in the north of Ireland, who threatened to resist Home Rule by force. The outbreak of the First World War led the British government to postpone any changes in Ireland. Irish nationalists were not willing to wait, and in 1916 there was an uprising, the Easter Risings, against the British in Dublin. The leader of the uprising were executed under military law. A guerrilla what?
Guerrilla.
A guerrilla war against the British Army and the police in Ireland followed. In 1921, a peace treaty was signed, and in 1922, Ireland became 2 countries. The 6 countries in the north, which were mainly Protestant, remained part of the UK under the name Northern Ireland. The rest of the Ireland became the Irish Free State. It has its own government and became a republic in 1949. There were people in both parts of Ireland who disagreed with the split between the North and the South. They still wanted Ireland to be one independent country. Years of disagreement led to a terror campaign in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. The conflict between those wishing for full Irish independence and those wishing to remain loyal to the British government is often referred to as the Troubles. The interwar period. The interwar period. In the 1920s, many people's living conditions got better. There were improvements in public housing and new homes were built in many towns and cities. However, in 1929, the war entered the Great Depressions and some parts of the UK suffered mass unemployment. The effects of the depressions of the 1930s were felt differently in different parts of the UK. The traditional heavy industries such as shipbuilding were badly affected, but new industries including the automobile and aviation industries. What is aviations? Aviations mean the flying or operations of aircraft. Is it aviations? Aviations. Aviation industry developed. As prices generally fell, those in work had more money to spend. Car ownership doubled from 1 million to 2 million between 1930 and 1939. In addition, many new houses were built. It was also a time of culture blossoming, with writers such as Graham
Greene.
Such as Graham Greene and Evelyn Wood, isn't it? Wait.
Graham Greene and Evelyn Waugh.
Graham Greene and Evelyn Waugh. Prominence. What is prominence? Let me see. Famous. Prominent is a famous. The economics, John Maynard Keynes. What? What? Right click.
John Maynard Keynes.
The economist John Maynard Keynes published published influential new theories of economics. The BBC started radio broadcasts in 1922 and began the world's first regular television service in 1936. The Second World War. Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933. He believed that the conditions imposed on Germany by the Allies after the First World War were unfair. He also wanted to conquer more land for the German people. He set about negotiation treaties. What? Treaties. What is treaties? Renegotiation. A formally conducted and ratified agreement between states. More on the. Okay. He set about renegotiation treaties, building up arms and testing Germany's military strength in nearby countries. The British government tried to avoid another war. However, when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, Britain and France declared war in order to stop his aggressions. The war was initially fought between the Axis powers, fanciest Germany, Fascists or what? Fascists. So what is fascists? The advocator or followers of the political philosophy or systems of fascism. Oh, kinds of follower. Oh. The war was initially fought between the Axis power, fanciest Germany and Italy, and the Empire of Japan and the Allies. The main countries of the Allied side were the UK, France, Poland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the Unions of South Africa. Having occupied Australia and invaded Czechoslovakia, Hitler followed his invasions of Poland by taking control of Belgium and the Netherlands. Then in 1940, German forces defeated Allied troops and advanced through France. At this time of nation crisis, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister and Britain war leader. Oh, so Winston Churchill 1874 to 1965. Churchill was the son of a politician and before becoming a Conservative MP in 1900, was a soldier and journalist. In May 1940, he became Prime Minister. He refused to surrender to the Nazi and was an inspirational leader to the British people in the times of hardship. Oh, he lost the general elections in 1945 but returned as Prime Minister in 1951. He was an MP until he stood down at the 1964 general elections. Following his death in 1965, he was giving a state funeral. He remains a much admired figure to this day, and in 2002 was voted the greatest Britain of all time by the public. Oh, Britain. What is Britain? Great Britain. Oh, is it Britain? Yeah, the greatest Britain of all time by the public. During the war, he made many famous speeches, including lines which you may still hear. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat. What is a toil? Blood, toil. Work extremely hard. Oh, work hard is a labor. Toil. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat. Oh. Churchill's first speech to the House of Commons after he became the Prime Minister in 1940. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. Wow. Speech to the House of Commons after Dunkirk 1940. Wow. Never in the fields of human conflict was so much owned by so many to so few. Wow, never in the fields of human conflict was so much owned by so many to so few. Speech to the House of Commons during the Battle of Britain in 1940. This is a Winston Churchill look like. Winston Churchill, best known for his leadership in the UK during the Second World War. As France fell, the Britain decided to evacuate British and French soldiers from France in a huge naval operation. What is naval? Navy. Oh. By navy is a sea. Naval operations. Many civilian volunteers in small pleasure and fishing boats from Britain held the navy to rescue more than 300,000 men from the beaches around Dunkirk. Dunkirk or what? Port or northern, how to pronounce?
Dunkirk.
Oh.
Dunkirk.
Oh, Dunkirk. Oh, Dunkirk. Understand?
Dunkirk.
Dunkirk. Around Dunkirk. Although many lives and a loss of equipment were lost, the evacuations was successful and meant that Britain was better able to continue the fight against the Germans. The evacuations gave rise to the phrase the Dunkirk spirits. From the ends of June 1940 until the German invasions of the Soviet Union in June 1941, Britain and the Empire stood a man almost against Nazi Germany. Hitler wanted to invade Britain, but before sending in troops, Germany needed to control the air campaign against Britain. But the British resisted with their fighter planes and eventually won the crucial aerial battle against the Germans called the Battles of Britain. In the summers of 1940, the most important planes used by the Royal Air Force in the Battle of Britain were the Spitfire and the Hurricane. Hurricane, isn't it? Hurricane, which were designed and built in Britain. Despite the crucial victory, the German Air Force was able to continue bombing London and other British cities at night time. This is called the, what do you call? Blitz or what? Blitz. Coventry was almost totally destroyed and great deal of damage was done in other cities, especially in the east end of London. Despite the distractions, there was a strong national spirit of resistance in the UK. The Blitz spirit is still used today to describe Britain's pulling together in the face of adversity. At the same time as defending Britain, the British military was fighting the Axis on many other fronts. In Singapore, the Japanese defeated the British and then occupied Burma. Wow. Threatening India. The United States entered the war when the Japan's bombed its naval base at Pearl Harbor in December 1941. The same year, Hitler attempted the last invasions in history by attacking the Soviet Union. It's a Russia, right? It was a fierce. What?
Fierce.
Fierce. What is fierce? Intense, aggressive. Oh, so much. It's a big. It was a fierce conflict with huge losses on both sides. German forces were ultimately repelled by the Soviets, and the damage they sustained proved to be a pivotal point in the war. The Allied force gradually gained the upper hand, winning significant victories in North Africa and Italy. German losses in the Soviet Union, combined with the support of the American, meant that the Allies were eventually strong enough to attack Hitler forces in Western Europe. On 6 June 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy. This event is often referred to as a D-Day. Following victory on the beaches of Normandy, the Allied forces pressed on true France, and eventually into Germany. The Alliance comprehensively defeated Germany in May 1945. The war against Japan ended in August 1945 when the United States dropped its newly developed atom bomb on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Scientists led by Easton Rutherford, working at Manchester and then Cambridge University, were the first to split the atom and took part in the Manhattan projects in the United States, which developed the atomic bomb. The war was finally over. Oh, shit. Don't come World War III. I don't want it. Alexander Fleming, 1881 to 1955. Born in Scotland, Fleming moved to London as a teenager and later qualified as a doctor. He was researching influenza. What? Let me see. What? Influenza. What is influenza? It's a flu. Vital infections, kinds of. So he was searching influenza, is the flu, in 1928 when he discovered penicillin. This was then further developed into a usable drug by the scientists Howard Florey and how to pronounce? Ernst Chain. By the 1940s, it was in mass productions. Fleming won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1945. Penicillin is still used to treat bacterial infections today. Check that you understand. What happened during the First World War, the partitions of Ireland and the establishments of the UK as it is today, the events of the Second World War, Britain since 1945. Okay, cool. Almost done. Sue. Fighting. Come on. Britain since 1945. The welfare state. Although the UK had won the war, the country was exhausted economically and the people wanted change. During the war, there had been significant reforms to the educational system and people now look for wider social reforms. In 1945, the British people elected a Labour government. 1945. The new Prime Minister was what? How to pronounce? Hey, screw me.
Clement Attlee.
The new Prime Minister was Clement Attlee, who promised to introduce the welfare state outlines in the Beveridge Report. Beveridge Report. In 1948, what? Annurin. Annurin 9 Bevan. The Ministers of Health led the establishments of the National Health Service NHS. It's at 1948, which guarantee a minimum standards of health care for all, free at the points of use. The national systems of benefit was also introduced, 1948, introduced to provide social security so that the populations would be protected from the cuddle to the grave. Cuddle to the grave. From the beginning to the end. Isn't it a grave is a, the grave. Until die, isn't it? Yeah, it's a grave. It's a throne. The government took into public ownership, nationalized the railway, coastal mines, and gas, water, and electricity supplies. Another aspect of change was self-governments for former colonies. In 1947, independence was granted to 9 countries, including India, Pakistan, Ceylon, now called Sri Lanka. Other colonies in Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific achieved independence over the next 20 years, or they also got independence over the next 20 years. Okay. And the UK developed its own atomic bomb and joined the new North Atlantic Treaty Organizations called NATO. Oh, NATO is a North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Is it treaty or how to pronounce? Let me see.
Treaty.
Yeah. North Atlantic Treaty Organizations called NATO. An alliance of nations set up to resist the perceived threats and invasions by the Soviet Union and its allies. Britain had a conservative government from 1951 to 1964. Oh, conservative governments from 1951 to 1964. The 1950s were a period of economic recovery after the war and increasing prosperity, isn't it? Prosperity, hey. Prosperity, isn't it? Prosperity is a rich or something.
Prosperity.
Yeah, prosperity. Being prosperous is a richness. It's a success, well. So, Britain had a conservative government from 1951 to 1964. The 1950s were a period of economic recovery after the war and increasingly prosperity for working people. The prime ministers of the day, Harold Macmillan, isn't it? Macmillan. Macmillan was famous for his winds of change speech about decolonization and independence for the countries of the empire, or he want the call winds of change. He doesn't want to be colonized, decolonization and independence for the countries of the empire. Understand now? So Clement Attlee. let me see.
Clement Attlee.
Clement Attlee. 1883 to 1967. Clement Attlee was born in London in 1883. His father was a solicitor, and after studying at Oxford University, Attlee became a barrister. What is a barrister? A person called at the bar. Yeah, barrister is kind of... Oh, barrister is a lawyer, not the barrister at the coffee shop. It's a lawyer, professional pleasure, counsel. Wow. Attlee became a barrister. He gave this up to do social works in East London and eventually became a Labour MP. He was Winston Churchill's deputy prime minister in the wartime coalition's governments and became prime minister after the Labour Party won the 1945 elections. He was prime minister from 1945 to 1951 and led the Labour Party for 20 years. Oh, he led the Labour Party for 20 years. And Attlee's governments undertook the nationalizations, isn't it? Nationalizations of major industry like coal and steel, created the National Health Service and implement many of the Bavish plan. Hey, Bavish or what?
Beverages.
Beverages. What? Beverages. Drink. Yeah, other than water. Kinds of sweet drink, isn't it? Many of the beverages plans for a stronger welfare states. Athletes also introduced measures to improve the conditions of workers. William Beverages. Oh, hey, beverage is not a drink. It's a beverage is a person. Oh shit. Beverages, yeah, plan. William Beverages, isn't it? Oh. trouble me.
Beverage.
Beveridge. William Beveridge, 1979 to 1963. What? It should be, 1879 to 1963. Okay. William Beveridge, later Lord Beveridge, was a British economics and reformer. He served briefly as a Liberal MP and was subsequently the leader of the Liberals in the House of Lords, but is best known for the 1942 report Social Insurance and Allied Services, known as the Beveridge Report. The report was commissioned by the wartime governments in 1941. It recommended that the government should find ways of fighting the 5 giant evils or wants: disease, ignorance, squalor. What?
Squalor.
Squalor. What is squalor? Oh, it's very dirty. Squalor and idleness, and provided the visits of the modern welfare states. Oh, I understand now. Giant evil mean one: disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. Oh. R.A. Rue Butler, 1902 to 1982. Oh. Richard Austin Butler, later called Lord Butler, was born in 1902. Oh, so he can live up to 80 years old. Oh, not bad. He became a Conservative MP in 1923. So at the age of 21, he became a Conservative MP. Wow, so young. And held several positions before becoming responsible for education in 1941. In this role, he oversaw the introductions of the Education Act 1944, often called the Butler Act, which introduced free secondary educations in England and Wales. The education system has changed significantly since the Act was introduced, but the divisions between primary and secondary schools that it enforced still remain in most areas of Britain. Dylan Thomas, 1914 to 1953. Dylan Thomas was a Welsh poet and writer. He often read and performed his work in public, including for the BBC. His most well-known work include the radio play and the Millwood, first performed after his death in 1954, and the poem Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night, which he wrote for his dying father in 1952. He died at the age of 39 in New York. There are several memorials to him in his birthplace, Swansea, including a statue and the Dylan Thomas Center. Migrations in post-war Britain. Rebuilding Britain after the Second World War was a huge task. There were labor shortages, and the British government encouraged workers from Ireland and other parts of Europe to come to the UK and help with the reconstructions. In 1948, people from the West Indies were also invited to come and work. During the 1950s, there was still a shortage of labor in the UK. Further immigration was therefore encouraged for economic reasons, and many industries advertised for workers from overseas. For example, centers were set up in the West Indies to recruit people to drive buses. Textiles and engineering firms from the north of England and the Midlands sent agents to India and Pakistan to find workers. For about 25 years, people from the West Indies, India, Pakistan, and later Bangladesh traveled to work and settle in Britain. Social change in the 1960s. The decades of the 1960s was a period of significant social change. It was known as the swing cities. There was growth in British fiction, cinema, and popular music. Two well-known pop music groups at the time were the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. People started to become better off, and many bought cars and other consumer goods. Oh, social change in the 1960s. So starting from the 1960s is a really growth. It was also a time when social law were liberalized, for example, in relation to divorce and to abortions in England, Wales, and Scotland. The positions of women in the workplace also improved. It was quite common at the time for employers to ask women to leave their jobs when they got married. But Parliament passed new laws giving women the right to equal pay and made it illegal for employers to discriminate against women because of their gender. In 1960s was also a time of technological progress. Britain and France developed the world's only supersonic commercial airliner. Hey, Concorde. Concorde, what?
Concord.
Concorde. Concorde. Oh. Concord. New styles of architecture, including high-rise buildings and the use of concrete and steel, became common. Okay, the number of people migrated from the West Indies, Pakistan, India. Hey, so Indies and India are different. Indies is maybe southern parts of what East in Indies. East India. Variants of India. Oh, they have another called Indies. What's not east, south, west. So what's okay? West Indies, India, Pakistan, and what is now Bangladesh, and fell in the late 1960s because the government passed new laws to restrict immigration to Britain. Immigrants were required to have a strong connection to Britain through birth or ancestry. What?
Ancestry.
Yeah, ancestry is an ancestor, okay? Even so, during the early 1970s, Britain admitted 28,000 people of Indian origin who had been forced to leave Uganda. What?
Uganda.
Uganda. Oh, Uganda. What is Uganda? Landlocked country in East Africa. Oh, Uganda. So even so, during the early 1970s, British admitted 28,000 people of Indian origin who had been forced to leave Uganda. Oh, they sent some Indian people, 28,000 people of Indian to Uganda. Oh, some great British inventions of the 20th century. Britain has given the world some wonderful inventions. They gave the world to some wonderful inventions. Examples from the 20th century include the television was developed by Scotsman John Logie Baird, 1888 to 1946. In the 1920s, so before he died, he developed the televisions. In 1932, he made the first television broadcast between London and Glasgow. And radar was developed by Scotsman Sir Robert Wilson Wood, 1892 to 1973, who proposed that enemy aircraft could be detected by radio waves. The first successful radar test took place in 1939. Working with radar lead Sir Bernard Lover, 1930 to 2012, to make new discoveries in astronomy. The radio telescope he built at Jodak Bank in Cheshire was for many years the biggest in the world and continue to operate today. The tuning machine. What does it mean, tuning machine? Tuning machine. Chewing. What is chewing? All kinds of fast computer. Artificial intelligence. What? The Turing machine is a theoretical mathematical device invented by Alan Turing, 1912 to 1954. A British mathematician in the 1930s. The theory was influential in the developments of computer science and modern-day computer. Oh, that's why they call the AI also produced. He was also investigated artificial intelligence. Wow, carry out important code-breaking works in the Second World War. Concept of theoretical computing machines. Okay, got this. The Scottish physician and researcher John
MacLeod,
1876 to 1930, was the co-discoverer of insulin. Insulin is used to treat diabetes. The structure of the DNA module was discovered in 1953 through work at British universities in London and Cambridge. This discovery contributed to many scientists' advances, particularly in machine and fighting crimes. Particularly in medicine and fighting crimes. Oh. Francis Crick, 1916 to 2004. One of those awarded the Nobel Prize for this discovery was British. The jet engine was developed in Britain in the 1930s by Sir Frank William, 1907 to 1996, a British Royal Air Force engineer officer. Sir Christopher Cockerill, what? Cockerill, 1910 to 1999, a British inventor, invented the hovercraft. Hey, what is hovercraft?
Hovercraft.
Hovercraft. What is it? What? Vehicle or craft travels over land or water on a cushions or air. Oh, hovercraft means kinds of vehicle that travel either land or water. Oh, invented the hovercraft in the 1950s. Britain and France developed it. What?
Concorde.
What is Concorde? What? Supersonic airliner able to cruise at twice the speed of sound. Wow. Britain and France developed it Concorde, the world's only supersonic passenger aircraft. It first flew in 1969 and began carrying passengers in 1976. Concorde. Is a Concorde or Concorde was retired from service in 2003. It first flew in 1969 and began carrying passengers in 1976. So this was until 2003, the Concorde. It carried the passenger. The Harrier Jamjack. Okay. First is the supersonic aircraft, now become a jack. The aircraft capable of taking off vertically was also designed and developed in the UK. In the 1960s, James Goodfellow, 1973, until now, maybe he's still alive, isn't it? Invented the cash dispensing ATM machine. Automated teller machines or cash point. The first of these were put into use by the Barclay Bank in Enfield, North London in 1967. So UK is the first development of ATM, IVF. The in vitro fertilization therapy for the treatments of infertility was pioneered in Britain by Physiologic, isn't it? Physiologic. Biography. Okay. By Physiologic, Sir Robert Edwards, 1925 to 2013. And Genopsychologists, isn't it?
Gynecologist.
No, gynecologist. Gynecologist Patrice Steptoe, 1930 to 1988. The world's first test tube baby was born in Oldham, Lancashire. Hey, Lancaster or what?
Lancashire.
Lancashire in 1978. Oh, test tube baby. Wow. In 1996, two British scientists, Salem Woomot, 1944. Oh, he is still alive. And Kate Campbell, 1954 to 2012, led a team which was the first to succeed in cloning a mammal, Dolly the sheep. Oh. This has led to further research into the possible use of cloning to preserve and
Endangered.
Endanger mean not a dangerous or what? Endanger. Have a risk. Hey, it is dangerous. Endangered species and for medical purposes. Sir Peter Mansfield, 1933 to 2017, a British scientist, is the co-inventor of the MRI. MRI is a magnetic resonance imaging scanner. This enables doctors and researchers to obtain exact and non-invasive images of human internal organs and has revolutionized revolutionize diagnostics machine. The inventors of the World Wide Web, WWW, Internet, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, 1955. Oh, he is still a British. Oh, he is still alive. Information was successfully transferred via the web from the first time in 25th of December 1990. Oh, 1990 is the first internet born, 25th of December. Understand now. Problems in the economies in the 1970s. In the late 1970s, the post-war economic boom came to an end. Prices of goods and raw material began to rise sharply, and the exchange rate between the pound and other currency was unstable. Problems in the economy in the 1970s. In the late 1970s, the post-war economic boom came to the end. Prices of goods and raw materials began to rise sharply, and the exchange rate between the pounds and other currency was unstable. This caused problems with the balance of payments. Imports of goods were valued at more than the price paid for exports. Many industry and services were affected by strikes, and this caused problems between the trade unions and the governments. People began to argue that the unions were too powerful and that their activities were harming the UK. The 1970s were also a time of serious unrest in Northern Ireland. In 1972, the Northern Ireland Parliament was suspended and Northern Ireland was directly ruled by the UK government. Some 3,000 people lost their lives in the decades after 1969 in the violence of Northern Ireland. So the Northern Ireland Parliament was suspended or no longer have a Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland was directly ruled by the UK government. Some 3,000 people lost their lives in the decades after 1969 in the violence of Northern Ireland. Wow. Mary Peters, 1939. Born in Manchester, Mary Peters moved to Northern Ireland as a child. She was a talented athlete who won an Olympic gold medal in the marathon. No, marathon. It's a pentathlon or what?
Pentathlon.
Pentathlon. What is pentathlon? riding. Something qua. 5 different events for each competitor. Pentathlon in 1972. After this, she raised money for local athletes and became the team manager for the Women British Olympic team. She continued to promote sport and tourism in Northern Ireland and was made a Dames of the British Empire in 2000 in recognition of her work. Europe and the Common Market. West Germany, France, Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands formed the European Economic Community (EEC). In 1957, Germany, France, Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, and Netherlands formed the European Economics Community. The EEC became part of the European Union when it was formed in 1993. The UK was a full member of the European Union but did not use the euro currency. The EU formally left the European Union on 31st of January 2020. It's the last year, isn't it? Not last year, 2 years before now. It's good. Conservative governments from 1979 to 1997. Margaret Thatcher, Britain's first woman prime minister, led the Conservative government from 1979 to 1990. The government made structural changes to the economy through the preservation, isn't it? No.
Privatization.
Privatizations of nationalist industries and imposed legal controls on trade union powers. Deregulation saw a great increase in the roles of the City of London as an international center for investments, insurance, and other financial services. Traditional industries such as shipbuilding and coal mining declined. In 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, a British overseas territory in the South Atlantic. A naval task force was sent from the UK and military action led to the recovery of the islands. John Major was Prime Minister after Margaret Thatcher and helped establish the Northern Ireland peace process. Okay, good. Margaret Thatcher, 1925 to 2013. Margaret Thatcher was the daughter of the grocer from Grantham in Lincolnshire. She trained as a chemist and lawyer. She was elected as the Conservative MP in 1959 and became a cabinet minister in 1970s. As the Secretary of State for Education and Science. 1975, she was elected as leader of the Conservative Party and so became leaders of the oppositions. Following the Conservative victory in the general elections in 1979, Margaret Thatcher became the first woman Prime Minister of the UK. She was the longest-serving Prime Minister of the 20th century, remaining in office until 1990s. During her premiership, there were a number of important economic reforms within the UK. She worked closely with the United States President Ronald Reagan and was one of the first Western leaders to recognize and welcome the changes in the leadership of the Soviet Union, which eventually led to the end of the Cold War. So Ronald Ronald 1916 to 1990. Ronald was born in Wales to Norwegians or what?
Norwegian.
Yeah, Norwegian. Ronald was born in Wales to Norwegian parents. He served in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. It was during the 1940s that he began to publish books and short stories. He is most well known for his children's book, although he also wrote for adults. His best known works include Charlie's and the Chocolate Factory and George's Marvelous Medicine. Several of his books have been made into films. Labour government from 1997 to 2010. In 1997, the Labour Party, led by Tony Blair, was elected. The Blair government introduced a Scottish Parliament and a Wales Assembly. The Scottish Parliament has substantial powers to legislate. The Welsh Assembly was given fewer legislative powers but considerable control over public services. In Northern Ireland, the Blair government was able to build on the peace process, resulting in the Good Friday Agreement signed in 1998. The Northern Ireland Assembly was elected in 1999 but suspended in 2002. It was not restated until 2007. Most parliamentary groups in Northern Ireland have decommissioned their arms and are inactive. Gordon Brown took over as Prime Minister in 2007. Conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. Throughout the 1990s, Britain played a leading role in coalitions, isn't it?
Coalition.
Yeah, coalitions. Throughout the 1990s, Britain played a leading role in coalition forces involved in the liberations of Kuwait, following the Iraq invasions in 1990s and the conflicts in the former republics of Yugoslavia. Since 2000, British armed forces have been engaged in the global fight against international terrorism and against proliferations of weapons of mass destruction, including operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. British combat troops left Iraq in 2009. The UK now operates in Afghanistan as part of the United Nations UN mandated 50 Nations International Security Assistance Force. Coalitions and other invitations of the Afghan governments. So ISAF is an International Security Assistance Force is working to assure that Afghan territory can never again be used as a safe haven for international terrorism, where groups such as Al-Qaeda could plan attack on the international community. As part of its International Security Assistance Force, ISAF is building up the Afghan of this. ISAF is building ISAF, isn't it?
ISAF.
Yeah, ISAF is building up the Afghan National Security Force and is helping to create a secure environment in which governments and development can be extended. International forces are gradually handing over responsibility for security to the Afghans, who will have full security responsibility in all provinces by the end of 2014. So 2010 onwards and Brexit. In May 2010, and for the first times in the UK since February 1974, no political party won an overall majority in the general elections. The Conservatives and Liberal Democrat parties formed a coalition and the leaders of the Conservative Party, David Cameron, became Prime Minister. The Conservative Party won a majority of the general elections of 7 May 2015 and David Cameron remained Prime Minister. The Conservative government called the referendums on the UK's memberships of the European Union. This was held on 23rd June 2016. The UK voted by the margins of 51.9% to 48.1% to leave the European Union. David Cameron was succeeded as Prime Minister after the referendum by Theresa May on 13 July 2016. She in turn was succeeded by Boris Johnson. After David Cameron, Theresa May. Now she in turn was succeeded by Boris Johnson on 24 July 2019. The UK formally left the European Union on 31st of January 2020. 31st of January 2020. 31st January 2020. Understand. And check that you understand the establishments of the welfare state, how life in Britain changed in the 1960s and 1970s, British inventions of the 20th centuries. You do not need to remember date of births and death. British inventions of the 20th century. We don't need to remember dates of births and death, even since 1979. Understand now.